as I was listening to you all talk, I was thinking, what about if we watched the Amanda Gorman's poem together and really reflected on that and brought that forth and amplified that instead of amplifying something that something else that is now over there.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it in its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
And I wonder, hearing that piece, whether it was yesterday, whether it was just for the first time, whether it was your fifth time, whether it's the first time, we've experienced this together, what resonates with you? What is our work to do in our schools? So maybe that's a two-parter, or one or the other. What resonates? What stuck with you from Amanda's beautiful poem, powerful poem, and what is our work to do? And I'm just going to offer it up to anyone who wants to start. We don't have to go in the chat order. And once we get started, whoever it is, we'll just go to the next person. Feel free to pass if you need more time to really think about it. But just, what's your response to that, your reflection, and what is our work to do in schools?
I'm not sure if this is totally answering all the parts of your question, but a part that really stuck out to me was she said a past we step into and how we repair it. And I think that is just super important, that we can't just go forward and not think about all the things that have happened in the past and really just fix what people have done, and so we can move forward. So we have to fix what we've done so we can move forward effectively. And the other part of the question, I not totally have my answer yet, but
we can start with the first one for sure, or you can speak to both. Thank you, Tia, for starting us off. Evelyn, would you like to hop in next?
For sure. I want to add to what Tia said, and I'm looking at the document with the words in it, and I like, and just the line before that is, it's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. And I appreciate the fact that the privilege of being American isn't just like has to be accepted and we go, but like in addition to that, being American is like you said, Tia, like repairing that past and acknowledging it and also moving forward and all of the parts that interact with that. And then I'm just looking at the other questions. And what is our work to do? I think to add to that is there is so much ignorance or just not knowing or not educating in our system of sort of checking the boxes of what we're meant to know. And I think anti-racism and white supremacy culture and all of those things need to be taught as we grow and be a part of the conversation, because there is like so much proof that racism and like white supremacy culture is embedded in kids as young as like 3 or 4. Like when they get into preschool, it already starts to show. So beginning the process of like professional development and that learning, I think is the first step. Having the educators all be truly educated on how to interact with these really challenging topics.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that again quickly. I remember when George Floyd was murdered, it went, when I went to school, like when it happened, I feel like it was addressed in a way that it was just when I got home, I was like, what in the world? Like that's not what happened. Like, And I was talking to my mom about it, and mom was like, well, it's really hard. And it must have been really hard for the teachers to have to bring this to school with people from all different, where they're at home, they're hearing all different things, and everyone has to be on the same page. And I understand that it's very hard to say what you need to say without anyone getting like offensive, but also at the same time, when people can say like it's a political opinion, but it's not a political opinion. It was murder, and I feel like it should have been presented that way, because if they think it's not like that, and they go home and it's not, and they're hearing the same, like if it's put out where it's not saying this is wrong, this is murder, this is prejudice, not like, and then they go home and they hear something that's totally not true, that's just going to get cemented in their brain and nothing's conflicting with that. So I think that's really important when because this is going to happen in the future. It's not like it's not happening anymore, so I think when stuff like that happens in the future, that's really important for teachers to really explain what it is and tell people, yeah, this is what it is, and not be totally bland about it. So people who are getting at home, who are getting like things that are different from the truth, have something to conflict with that.
For me, I agree with all the points stated previously. I also had this quote from this poem that could also like connect with that, and it was in the beginning, and it was and the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And number one, the wordplay there is beautiful, but also I think like looking at that from the eyes of like not wanting to offend other people and like the various perspectives that people are like we see, like the norms and notions of like what we think is all right in society isn't really like, it's not correct, and it shouldn't be like that. And like for some people, like if they accept that that's how it is, like that's where we have to, that's where we have to do our work. We have to change those norms of like understanding it's not okay to like promote the beliefs of having like, just because you're on the other side of the political aisle doesn't mean you can still uphold these racist beliefs and, just put it under the name of your political party. Like, no, we got to change that.
Yeah, I agree with everybody so far. I think we've hit a lot of really good points. What resonates with me is definitely the idea of moving forward, but not moving past our past. We need to address everything. And that's also what I think we need to work towards. We need to address everything in full, like we've mentioned before. And we don't want to make it seem better than it is. We want to educate the youth about the truth. So, because we don't want to raise another generation that has same problems. We don't want to repeat history. So moving forward, we need to be as open as we can.
Zoe, do you want to chime in?
Sure. So one of the things, one of the little sections that I thought was just stuck with me in this poem was that let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, and even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious. That just stuck with me because even if you're having a bad day, cheer yourself up, not really, but just to keep going, just keep going, and things that are hard for you, and things that are important for the world, and just people.
Thank you.
So I, as a teacher, I showed this to my students this morning, and I showed it to my children at home too. And I just thought it made my head explode with its brilliance. And this woman was just such a hero at the right time and with words. And as Jeswyn mentioned, her wordplay was unbelievable. And then her historical allusions, I think at the beginning she talked about, she had all these historical allusions, including a more perfect union. And so she was taking snippets from, the Constitution, and then she talked about to bear arms or to reach out with our arms, bringing up all these really thorny issues in such a beautiful and stupendous way. And then she talked about victory won't lie in the blade, but in the bridges. And I just felt that was it. To me, it's just an astounding, the perfect moment that this country needed. And she just delivered it, and it was awesome. And then the other thing that I love about history is the way you can follow it down these paths. She was wearing a ring that had been given to her by Oprah Winfrey that was honored Maya Angelou, and it was caged birds. Both her earrings and her ring were birds to honor Maya Angelou. Why the caged bird sings. And the last verse of that poem says, "The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still. And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom." And those allusions and the wordplay and the delivery and the fact that she has overcome a speech impediment and some of the challenges that she talked about to deliver in that moment, to me, is what makes greatness a possibility. And for that, for her to come and do that, I thought was just amazing. And to do it looking at the Lincoln Memorial in that place when this country really needed it, I thought it was amazing.
I want to offer Leo and Mira space, but I also just want to respond to what you're saying, Don. And I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I just want to, as I'm listening to you talk about the poem, which all those things are 100%, I wonder if that's some of our work to do. Like, perhaps we shouldn't intellectualize, and make it this intellectual experience. And also, it gets back to kind of what Tia, you were saying earlier around how we whitewash things. Like we're taking this incredible poet and then, she's a human. And what I heard from her poem was so much. And what really resonated was like this idea around like we need to rebuild and then like reconcile with what, and then recover and move on to a better place with love. And I think I hope, this is just my hope, and I'm just pushing back a little bit, Don, and anyone else feel free to push back on me. I hope that we did not intellectualize her poem today in classrooms. I hope we could just sit with it as a grounding piece of just a powerful, powerful piece. And I hope it doesn't become an intellectual pursuit to analyze her poetry and her words. I hope people just take it for what it is. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of when I was listening to that, what you were saying, I started to think about what's our work to do. And sometimes as educators, our work is just to be, Sam has his hand up.
Just trying to use good classroom etiquette. Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, Lindsay. One of the things I've been learning over the past few years, and I think we all have, is that to stand for social justice, to be an advocate, to push against isms, to be an anti-racist, it's not a destination, it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. And so I can hear what Don's saying, and I can hear what you're saying. And I think both are important. Like part of what makes her speech, her poem so powerful is the content of it. So to put a critical lens on that and to unpack what she's saying, sure, there's some deep value there. And also to be able to step back from that, go up to 3,000 feet and just consider what's happening, just the power of how she's saying and what she represents as a speaker at an inauguration ceremony is also, the more that we can understand about the context of that, the more powerful we understand that is. And so one of the things, again, we're thinking about our sphere of influence. I love being a teacher because instead of thinking I have to know all of the things and then transfer that knowledge to students, the goal, especially within standing for social justice, is providing students with those tools to understand what the journey is to move forward and take that on, because again, especially in a white majority state and a white majority district and school, it would be easy for me to ignore that and model that white privilege of being able to step aside and ignore the challenging, difficult conversations and content that needs to be investigated, disrupted, and dismantled. And so just a concrete example of that, which really struck me following the Capitol insurrection, was like, I mean, y'all remember it. I think it's seared into our brains. Like when Joe Biden came out to address what was happening, and the language he used was, "This isn't who we are." I think I've done enough work. So in that moment, even I could put a critical lens on that. And Joe Biden's someone that in my biased opinion, is I like a lot of what he stands for. I had a hard time hearing that. And I was very affirmed when Keith Knight, for all of you who may be familiar with the K Chronicles, in this past week's 7 days, put the comic that I just put a link to in the chat bar, where he specifically questioned that line. And it felt like such a moment of affirmation for me, like trying to constantly be doing the work, trying to continue learning and better understand how I can be a voice for anti-racism and stand for social justice, when he too questioned that line, "This isn't who we are," and did it in a very Keith Knight way. And again, if you don't know much about the K Chronicles, that's a pretty cool introduction in that comic I just posted. But again, it's not about me knowing the things to know and handing it to students and feel like I've checked my box as an educator. It's continuing to learn and grow, and then sharing with students how they can be a part of that journey, and making them, supporting them in becoming really critical thinkers, and giving them that context and that ability to also dig deep into the content to better understand what's happening and what we need to do to make this world a better place.
Thanks. I want to offer space for Leo and Mira to share.
Yeah, what Mr. Nelson said, and another thing that like resonates, with me is like, it might not be who we are, but we can become it. Like the last line in her poem, if we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it, because we can see what's happening, but we have to be the change, not watch the change.
Yeah, I think I agree entirely with what everyone said, and I think this really is an like exceptional poem, and I feel like every line should be its own lesson, and I want to like analyze every line. But I also agree with what you said, Lindsay, about how sometimes it's just kind of how it flowed and like the moment we heard it, and how that can be special too. One line that really stuck out to me is, "But that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose." And this really kind of reminds me of spaces that we're trying to form in classrooms, and kind of like, I know talking about this stuff, as like some people have said, is so hard, because there's so many ways to go about it, and so many ways. And like it's also not just the teacher, like like the class, like today talking about it in our class, it was kind of hard. And I think engagement in classes can go up, so many different ways. And it's hard to like create those spaces, and then to, have people utilize the spaces. But I think that's something that we should all try to do. And I think everyone should try to do, is kind of never like strive for perfection, because it's inevitable that will, that's really hard to do. And trying to be perfect, as we all know, is like almost impossible. But trying to create spaces that are directed, and where we talk about something, and when we say something, it doesn't need to be form perfect, because that's really hard, but it comes across with a meaning that we want to get out. And I think that was I think that's what I kind of caught from that line. I think it is so important that we just strive for a purpose, and kind of perfection isn't always needed when we all strive for perfection, but the more like it's more important to kind of just get our message across.
Thank you. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think those are great points, Mira. I kind of wanted to go back to what Lindsay brought about intellectualizing the poem and all that. And I found that an interesting point. For me personally, I think that for everyone who listens to that poem, like it should invoke a deep visceral reaction within you, and wherever you're coming from. I mean, the first thing, like the grandeur and the eloquence of her words, and it may or may not contrast with your own beliefs, but I still feel like that poem, it has so much to it than just the surface, that I think in order to understand its magnitude, we do have to kind of pick it apart and really like understand the wordplay and everything that went into it. So I feel like they kind of go hand in hand. Well, I mean, yes, you could say that by intellectualizing it, we're kind of distancing ourselves from like the real core, problems that she's highlighting in her poem. I still think we need to do that in order to like understand, going back to the initial questions, like how we feel about it and like what we need to change by, going back into those words, seeing what she's highlighting and seeing where we also need to make change from, the poem. So. I think it is a good point that we shouldn't really over intellectualize the poem and to sometimes just take it for the face value.
Um,
Oh yeah, go for it, Evelyn. Sorry.
no problem. Sorry didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to add on to that because it's interesting for me when Lindsay brought up the point about intellectualizing it, because I don't know if this is true for most students, but as a college student, my immediate reaction is to like pick out the parts that prove my point. And so as I'm reading, and I have it up, I'm like looking at the pieces that she's talked about that resonate with me in a way that I could argue. And it makes me almost like sad that is like the first thing that I did, in the sense of like this is a Black woman who's written something monumental in an incredible moment in history, and in however many years, like this is going to be something that's like this is going to be an assignment for youth. And so I don't know if there is a level of, if there's a difference between like intellectualizing something that would then be like an assignment for youth, or if there's like Jasmine said, I think like being able to pick it apart and understand and process. And so maybe that's like case by case basis, something that is different for each person. But I wanted to honor that. I totally like immediately, as soon as I had the words in front of me, it was like picking the pieces that I could like argue, which feels so yucky in my heart, and also like allowed me to really process what she said. So I think I think it also adds to the fact that these conversations are really challenging to have, and especially as an educator, in a space that you are meant to like hold the development and education of a whole generation. So in such a interesting time in history. So wanted to contribute that.
Yeah. I saw Meg unmuted. You went for it earlier too, I think.
Super quick, because I'm sitting with how the day went and processing it. And so I fear I may have intellectualized it, I'm not sure. But we did look at some of her other words and her TED Talk. Today, she has a really fabulous TED Talk, and she just thinks and speaks in these rhythms and patterns of language that if you are a language teacher, you just can't help but ride the wave that she has started, right? So I may have tripped and intellectualized it, but I'm just appreciating this. But I would encourage you to just check out her TED Talk. It's lovely.
Thank you. And Don has his hand up because got to follow classroom norms here. I was just gonna say perhaps intellectualize it is the wrong word, but when I think about so many poems, and I'm 110,000% guilty of this as also, a humanities educator, and and someone who loves to look at words and make meaning of it. When I first listened to her, because I watched it, I didn't have the words in front of me, and I was just like, literally, it's what you said, Jez, when the visceral reaction in my body of chills and love and like openness in my heart, and then just like having that experience in yourself before you start to then pick apart the words, you know. So maybe it's not an either or, you know. And so I just wanted to say that too. And Don, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just have, and Lindsay, just what you're saying, I guess the same thing happened to me. And I just remember the little rhyme she made with just is and justice. And that's when I was like, holy cow. And it just made me feel so proud that I could even be connected with this person by saying, like, you know, we're both in this together, you know. And it just made me so proud of what she was doing in that moment. I did have a question though, Evelyn. I really appreciated what you just said, and this is to the student partners. Is just how would you, like, what are your suggestions for bringing up something like this in the classroom? And what would you like? What would you recommend? What would you want to see come out of it? And what would you recommend? So I don't know. That's just a question based on, you know, you guys are making some folks are making some amazing comments, and I just would like to hear a little bit more.
Tia, hop in.
So I think what I'm hearing from everyone and kind of what I'm getting out of it is that it's such a beautiful poem, and when you hear it, you do, because it goes, she's talking, and there's so many parts of it that you have to think about. But I think it's important to say, look at this great poem, and acknowledge it. So people maybe didn't watch the inauguration, say, hey, look at this is great. But I think not to, like, well, Evelyn was saying, not to turn it into assignments where kids are like looking at it and they're just trying to get it done. Let's say you have something like 3 things, like pick 3 things and write about blah, 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 blah. Then kids are just going to copy and paste it. Maybe I can write this, and then maybe that'll come me up to like a 3, you know, not to like, to turn it into an assignment where kids are looking up at that as like a school project, with something that's just such an important thing that they can really internalize and say, hey, you know, this, I understand that, you know, instead of it being something that's like, oh, that's a school project, you know.
Adam, hop in.
Yeah, so I think something that's done in school a lot is we would look at a poem like that and analyze it. Evelyn was talking about looking for evidence to support a claim or something. And when I was watching, I was listening a lot for literary devices, because like I have to do some writing for a class right now, so I'm just trying to get any more of that I can. And that's not what I want to be listening for. I think it'd be really valuable to appreciate art for how it makes us feel rather than how it's made. Yeah, so I think there are a lot of classes where we do look at art forms in poetry or visual art or music, and we're, at least for me, I'm listening for the musical things or the evidence rather than how it makes me feel, and that might not be appreciated enough in the classroom.
Evelyn, I see a hand raised.
Yeah, I really appreciate what folks are saying, and I think that's like beautifully worded, exactly what I was meaning. So I appreciate that's shared. For myself, I am in the process of creating a middle school after school program at my school district, and it's for like anti-racism conversations with those kids, and I think that in my experience working with kids as not an educator, but just as another peer and student, it feels really important to have the open dialogue piece, and having youth have the opportunity to just be held in a space where they're allowed to voice their opinions, and it doesn't have to have like a result or be weighted as a grade, but really just a way to meet other folks where they're at. And I found that has truly allowed for folks to have like real conversations about things like this. And also, whenever talking about racism, I feel like it shouldn't be schoolified. Really love that word. I think it needs to be so separate. As like, I think it was Tia who said it about the school's reaction to George Floyd's murder, they like, and I can't imagine having to have that conversation or making that decision. And also somebody's murder was summed up in a nice little email. So it's problematic, and also there's stuff being done, but it feels like those open dialogues have worked really well. Winooski School District, which is where I attend school, had circles held by adults, and they had middle schoolers had the opportunity to discuss George Floyd's murder and how racism impacts their life. And so that's sort of what my program is being built off of. But it feels really important to keep school separate from issues like that.
And I see Maura's next, and I just want to add, like, what if school was that? Like, can we get rid of school, that thing that we don't want to blend with the other stuff, and just go with, so like just putting it out there. Maura, and then Tia.
Thanks. Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of what a lot of our youth partners are saying, but just thinking about the dynamic of school and the power that's held, if something is graded or assignments, and this idea of like searching for the right answer. And in doing that, it loses sort of the humanness of it, and also the opportunity for true feelings, which I think is a really critical part. But I just wanted to, and thinking about schools and the role of schools, there was a line, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. And I've just been really thinking about that, about the inaction and inertia sort of in every choice that we're making as schools. And then also thinking about what would it look like if we really were acting as if our legacy was love, and how would we be holding space for youth and making choices in schools, and just the actions that we would take.
Maura, Tia.
And back to kind of what Evelyn was saying about being kids be able to speak like their voice, like what they feel about, and be able to talk about it, because I could not agree more about that. I think that's so important. But then also in school, like I'm doing fully online, and having those conversations where there's a bunch of black screens, and nobody can see each other's faces. It's really hard. And, I'm guilty of not having my camera on. My morning classes, I get up like 2 minutes before class and I'm like, I'm tired. I don't want my camera on. But it's really hard to have those conversations. And, when you can't see anyone, you can't see emotion, you can't see how people are talking, and people aren't motivated to talk, where in a classroom, it's easier. And, there's kids who have like turning on their camera, or like turning on their microphone and talking, it's nerve-wracking. Or just even in a classroom, it can be nerve-wracking, but having it on a computer where it seems even more official, we're like, okay, I'm going to unmute and I'm going to talk, it makes it's just harder to say stuff like that. So I think it's really important to find a way where we can have those conversations, where kids can voice their opinions with having everyone engaged. And it's really hard to do that with everyone, online.
I was, a big part of, I keep forgetting to do this. A big part of online school for me is a feeling of loneliness, because I'm just staring at black screens. And recently people have stopped chatting, and sometimes like all these racial issues are so very important, but when you bring them up, sometimes you don't know if it has an effect on the other students. You don't know what kind of effect it has, because all you're looking at is black screens.
Thank you. Mira.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about kind of the schoolified thing, and that some parts of, I think the whole idea of school is, for the reason these things, like these issues kind of turn into assignments, is that for something to kind of qualify as learning, it needs to have a due date, and there needs to be a scale involved somewhere, and there needs to be you need to kind of have this regimen. There needs to be like a Google Doc where you need to fill in something in and collect research, and it's interesting because I think, like you said, Lindsay, like some things kind of you learn so much more. And I think a lot of things that come naturally in some ways. Like today we were kind of in groups talking about this, and I felt like it was so powerful. And I think that compared to, like, I remember when RGB died, and like there was there was this like huge Google Doc that we had to fill in, and like I remember thinking like I need this assignment that of RBG dying isn't turned in, and like that's kind of the only thing that I connected with her death, and there wasn't really any conversations. And like I think that conversations, and also things that like today also, like seeing the doc was really important for me because it's such a dense poem, and like seeing that doc and being able to like pick out things was so valuable. And I think that it really is hard to kind of figure out what's going to be effective. And I think like what Tia said, like finding like getting it done and like, you know, turning it in isn't really effective when you're thinking about your grade, and effective when you're thinking about how well you're doing with school. But it's not really about school. It's definitely more than school. It's kind of about having these conversations. And I think as educators, kind of you need to think about like how like back to that quote, what's the purpose? Like what at the end of you know class, what do you want kids to walk away with? Do you want them to walk away with kind of this, you know, like a 3, or do you want them to walk away with kind of lots of ideas and action steps forming in their minds?
So much. I just want to, it's going to be Jeswin and then Evelyn. And I just want to do like a, Don, is it okay if we go to 4:30?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, what's being said is just so powerful. I'm trying to sit with it here, and I'm just like listening as hard as I can. And I just really appreciate it. The feedback is just, thank you so much.
Jeswin.
So when Tia started talking about like the anxiety and like I don't know, those over Zoom with those conversations, I got this interesting idea of maybe we can use those black screens to our advantage. Maybe we can create anonymous discussions about heavy topics. And I mean that's an interesting idea because like I know like some people like it's to express the idea with their their photo on and like everything. It could just be too much, and I feel like just having anonymous conversations, just voicing your ideas out there without like any connection to you, I think we can utilize those black screens and everything and use it to our advantage to like have interesting discussions that's not really connected to other people. I just fear we might lose a bit of connection, but I'm not sure if we would gain that in the more depth of conversation we might achieve from having it be anonymous. So I'm not sure.
I love that perspective. I think that's so interesting and such a cool way of spinning that. And somebody said that in the chat, and I just really appreciate that. I prefer my video on when having these sorts of conversations, but can also totally understand like there must be so many reasons on top of just like not wanting to be on camera that could result in that sort of like reaction to these conversations. But what I wanted to add was that like thinking about students being educated in a global pandemic with all that's going on, like the need for a pause has been so unmet. And like the fact that the prioritized learning and grades, and like I had my first semester of college this year and feeling so overwhelmed and rushed to have like good grades and making sure that I was interacting with my peers and my teachers. And I think this is sort of like what Mira said, is like acting as though everything's normal when I'm a fully remote student and people who look like me, who have been oppressed for forever, are like on the front page of every like news, and having that be like what's happening in the world. And so it feels like such a backwards prioritization that I think needs to be addressed and talked more about, and like really prioritizing the safety and mental health and like kindness and love, which I think is in the poem for youth.
Thank you. TF, final thought on that, and then we'll go to a closing round.
Yeah, this is quick. I know I've been talking a lot, but so with like that whole pandemic thing, I feel one of the things I think is really important is I feel really heard when the teachers say, you know, it's okay that maybe your work isn't as good, your grades aren't as good as last year, because you know it is a pandemic and there's so many things going on. And you know, sometimes like I feel bad about like, oh, like look at my grades last year, where's my grades this year? And I'm like, oh, you know, maybe they're not as good, but I'm like, you know, it's a pandemic. I have to give myself a break. And I think that's really important for teachers to emphasize and say, you know, it's okay. And to be really willing with like, and I'm really thankful that my teachers, like if I need an email saying, hey, can I please get this in tomorrow? Which is great. And I think that's also a good thing to emphasize, you know, like if you're having trouble with this, just email us and, you know, you can work on it. You have an extra day to work on it. So I think that's really important that students get to know that it's okay not to always be perfect all the time.
Thank you, Tia. So for our closing, how about we talk about just briefly each of us. I know some people didn't necessarily have a lot of space to share, and I'm glad that we got to hear primarily from our youth partners here today. Thank you all for being here. What will you take away from our discussion today? And we'll start, how about we start with Kevin?
Thanks, Lindsay. Wow, I've just loved listening. You know, this has been amazing. I have three big takeaways. One is we need to make sure we're amplifying kids' voices every single day and as much as possible in school. If teachers need evidence for that, show them this, you know, this webinar. Like that's just outstanding. And it's so important that we're listening to our students and giving them space. And then my next two things is I think we have a lot of work to do as teachers to, you know, going back to that one, the first quote that I think Tia was talking about in the poem, just how it's the past we step into and we repair it. So as teachers, I think we need to acknowledge and teach to and inform our history with this level of, okay, how do we make it better, right? What are our next steps? And be willing to hold space for those hard conversations. And then again, I brought this up in the chat, but just, you know, it's sad to think like when we're thinking about let's not schoolify it or let's keep school separate from these issues. As a teacher, it kind of breaks your heart because, you know, school should be a place for love and learning and passion and growth. And we need to get school back to that. So I think we have a massive systems change that needs to happen in our education system. So and school doesn't feel like something that's, oh, we can't have these important conversations because it's school. I think groups like this, you know, this is who we need to make some of these bigger changes to change education, change the system as we know it, and let's disrupt it a little bit. And thank you all again. That was really powerful.
Is it me? Yeah. Echoing what Kevin said, and there's two things that are coming to mind for me. One is the relationships. Even if it's hard to have, you know, the screens or whatever, relationships and norms, and something I'm trying to deal with, work on, build, create, find is ways to build authentic norms with my students. So both for when we're in person and when we're remote. And the line that she has about that even as we tired, we tried. And I am constantly reminded of just when I feel the fatigue, I think of the fatigue that my friends and colleagues and people, that the exhaustion that people of color face every day of, you know, trying to move forward. So when I think I'm tired, I think about we got to keep trying. We just got to keep doing it. There's no excuse. There's no reason not to.
Thank you, Meg. And I have 5-month-old twins in the background. So if you hear them, that's what that is. And they have someone taking care of them and they're fine. But I just wanted to echo what Kevin was saying and really thinking through, and what Evelyn was saying, like, how do we create spaces to have these authentic and hard conversations? And, what would it look like if we reimagine school? Because this is essential, and it is something that we need to talk about. And Tia started us off in saying, at the beginning, schools need to be a space where we're engaging in these conversations and having tough conversations. And so how do we do that in a way that's authentic and that people can fully engage in, while also not schoolifying them, so that people really can sit in community with others and do this work. And thank you I'm still processing everything that our youth partners have been saying, and once again reminded of the power of youth. So thank you.
I'll be brief. I have so many things in my head right now, but I'll try to. I'm so grateful that we've had the chance to really have this conversation, to hear from everyone. And it just keeps striking me how much we needed this poem. We needed this art in our lives. And it brings me back to the idea of art in general. And the beauty of art is that everyone sees art, feels art, interprets art, uses art for healing, for movement, for activism, for joy, for whatever, in their own way. And so you can look at a picture hanging in a museum and feel one way, and someone else will look at it and see something totally different. And that is the beauty of that piece. And I feel like that's exactly what we just witnessed today. You take from it what you need in the moment. And I think that, everyone listening and hearing and digging in or not digging in, or just, having the conversation and putting it out there, is using that piece for what they need today in this moment, to be able to dig in and continue to have the conversations and do the work. So I think our conversation today was a perfect example of that. So thank you everyone for being present and, sharing.
Is it me? Are we doing the same order? Okay, I'm ready. I wrote it down. Everything we educators do is centered on students, so how we do it should center on student voices.
I think it's my turn. Something I took away from today is, like, when I hear like something like that, is not to again, not to look at like the literary devices, but look at the meaning of it. That's what I'm taking away from today.
One of the things that I think I'll take away from today is, like, instead of like looking into the past and worrying about like what will happen, is like doing, like, fixing the problems and stuff we had in the past, and like that's what you should do in the future instead of worrying about what will happen in the future. Like, just start figuring out how to fix what happened in the past.
Pop in, Evelyn. Thank you, Zoe.
I wanted to add, I liked Tia's a lot, and I think it's interesting because my mom has always said I should be a lawyer, and I always like intellectualize those things, and I think it's a good new perspective for me to try and just like feel those things. So that is going to be something that I take away and try and practice.
What I took away from this meeting was a lot of stuff, but I really love hearing other people's perspectives on all this stuff. So it was nice to hear that.
What I took away from this meeting is that, related to Evelyn, I kind of just need to take art for what it is, and taking that feeling, that reaction, without having to pick it apart, think it through, and just absorb, really.
Yeah, I'm definitely agreeing with Evelyn. Also, I think a lot of the time I'm kind of blending history, art, and schoolwork into one way I perceive things. And I don't think I'm getting everything out of everything. So either school needs to adjust to that, like we're saying, like don't schoolify everything, or I need to take upon myself to be able to appreciate everything and learn from everything in its own way.
Okay, I think it's my turn. Wow, this like everything everyone said and just having this safe space was so powerful, and so many thoughts are in my mind, and it's just amazing. And I think that's something in particular I'm gonna take away is kind of like the whole kind of, like Lindsay said, kind of enjoying things for what they are. I think that's kind of an interesting new perspective. And then also something I'm just kind of wondering is that, like, we've been talking a lot about how teachers schoolify things, but I'm wondering if any way like students are doing anything, or like I'm wondering if it's possibly a two-way street, and that like sometimes the students, though we are so busy and so though we're kind of sometimes in like get it done mode, like if there's any way we could look at assignments and conversations in a new way. Yeah.
What I would take away is that the young people, the children have the answers, and the challenge for the adults is to come up with the questions.
I'm taking away a lot of appreciation for you all for showing up and for going along on this ride. I just kind of pivoted. I hadn't really thought. I had a thought in my head, and then I was like, wait, no, we can't march back to what was, as Amanda Gorman said, but move to what can be. And I just really appreciate this conversation. And the ability to, like Mira said, the space to express like how it, like what it brought up for me being an educator, a former classroom educator, and having been in that like place where everything was like, everything had to be something related to something, and it's like, I just want to, when I can feel in my body, like when I can feel, I listen better and I learn better. And I know that as a learner, and I've learned that more having left the classroom, and being in a different position where I actually can experience that. And yeah, and so thank you all, and I'll pass it to Don.
Well, first, just thank you for everybody for being here this afternoon. I think this is an incredibly important conversation, and I just have so much respect for our youth partners and what you bring to the table in terms of, I just felt like I just sat and listened, and I just learned so much when youth are leading the conversation. And as Joe alluded to, I think the question now is like, how do I change my practice, to honor that? And actually, Mira said something in our Cultivating Pathways to Sustainability conference yesterday. She talked about how do you create systems where you can have these kind of conversations, and you can experience what I think, at least speaking for myself, what I just experienced in terms of just the thoughtful and really important things that people brought to the table. And I just want to thank everybody really deeply. I think this is what makes education so important. And so I feel it, I guess, is what I'm saying from the conversation. So thank you so much. Sam mentioned that we should probably have a part 2. And Lindsay also mentioned that there's on January 27th, there's a conversation at 6 p.m. And all of you are cordially invited back on February 18th at 3:15. And I think, as Joe mentioned, you guys have the answers. We're just going to have to come up with the questions to continue this conversation. And I guess in my theme of mindfulness, I'm just going to ask that everybody just takes maybe 30 seconds and just kind of briefly reflects on this conversation. And then I just wish you a happy, healthy, and safe future. And hopefully we'll see you again very soon. Thank you so much.